The Heilpern Show. BitMEX, the OG crypto derivatives platform and the best place to buy your Bitcoin.
Things really are just starting to heat up.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Heilpern Show. This show and this episode is going to be a very special one. A little bit different from what we usually talk about, but very much in line with the whole concept of freedom and becoming that sovereign individual. So I'm really excited to kick things off. But before we do, this podcast, as you know, is sponsored by BitMEX. So a quick message from BitMEX. BitMEX is the OG crypto derivatives exchange and now has a spot exchange for you to buy and sell crypto. Especially in a bear market, you really need a place that you can trust. And BitMEX sets the standard in reliability, performance, and transparency, and has proven itself through multiple market cycles. So it stood the test of time, which is very important. Right now, BitMEX is actually celebrating the start of BitMEX Spot with $1 million in prizes to give away. So to enter, all you have to do is trade the equivalent of $250 in crypto. So you could buy some Bitcoin, $250 worth of Bitcoin to enter, buy the dip, and you could also enter up to 25 times, which basically means you could win up to $500,000 in Bitcoin. So lots of prizes there to win. And a massive thank you to BitMEX again, because on this show, we do have the conversations that nobody else is having, really topical conversations that you're not sort of allowed to have right now. So a huge thank you to BitMEX. I'm leaving all of their information for you in the description below if you are watching on YouTube. And before I bring on my guests, I do want to ask you all to subscribe, hit the like button so you can support the channel and you never miss any of this really valuable content. All right, guys, let's get this going. So joining me on the show today is the world traveler, investor, entrepreneur, and founder of Nomad Capitalist. It is Andrew Henderson. Andrew, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm glad to be with you.
Great to be with you too. I've been following a lot of your stuff for a while and I like it a lot. It's very much in line with the sorts of ideas that I talk about in terms of being that sovereign individual, you know, preparing for all that's going on in the world. So let's just kick this off. For those who don't really know much about you, can you just give us a brief background about who you are and what you do?
So I founded a company called Nomad Capitalist, which was the result of my traveling all around the world and noticing inconsistencies, noticing arbitrage opportunities where investments would be higher yielding in one country or the people would be nicer in a different country. And so I was traveling all around the world and I noticed that where I was from in the US, didn't really like a lot of what was going on there. Had been talking since I was a child with my family about how it was going to become a less positive place for entrepreneurs, for successful people, for investors, and noticed that the culture in their places was more conducive to entrepreneurship. The people were more welcoming. They were more understanding. Again, interest rates were higher, whatever. And so I thought back to what my father told me when I was 12 years old: go where you're treated best. You don't have to stay in the same city, the same state, the same country. And I got a great permission slip to not have to stay around and take care of my family. They said, listen, we're going to take care of ourselves and you should go where you're treated best. And so I started noticing how that's not one place. What my father talked about in the mid-1990s of moving to New Zealand or moving to Chile is not the way that today you need to do it. You don't just move everything down to New Zealand or to Chile. You can diversify. And so that's what we talk about. We talk about having passports, residence permits, tax companies, everything in all the different places around the world so that you can take advantage of what each country has to offer that's best.
So you spoke about go where you're treated best, but there must have been something which really sparked you to want to start or establish Nomad Capitalist.
Well, I had started a number of businesses in the US and had done relatively well. Starting that at 19, 20 years old, back then, entrepreneurship, it was not a hashtag on Instagram. It was something that was kind of weird. And so socially speaking, it was difficult. And I noticed when I traveled to Europe, I had much better conversations about entrepreneurship with people my age. People seemed to be a lot more interested in it, whether from a friend's perspective, whether just, from a dating perspective, it just seemed to gel more. And then later in Asia as well. And also I was paying at the peak, like 43% of my income in taxes. And that was really inefficient. So I basically said, from a social perspective, from I want to explore the world, from hey, what's happening in Asia? This is like the future. I want to be part of that. From all of that, I started asking myself, well, okay, how does it work with taxes? Like, if you can work from anywhere, if you can make money anywhere, how does that work? And I realized, you can dramatically lower, if not even eliminate, your tax bill by living somewhere else. And so for me, it's like, all right, I'm going to save a bunch of money, and I'm going to live in a place or places that's much more conducive to what I want, and I'm going to have an adventure. And so it kind of spiraled from there over the last dozen or so years now, with homes in 6 different places and multiple passports and a very global lifestyle. It's been one where I've created a lot of optionality for myself.
Just out of interest, do you find it exhausting, that digital nomad lifestyle?
Well, I mean, I guess when I very first started, I had a home in the United States, and I traveled more and more and more, to where at one point I was home less than I was away. And I actually brought in like a roommate, because I bought a house, and I didn't want someone to break into the house because I was not really there that often. And so, that travel where you leave for a month or 2 months and you come back, and I would, leave and come back from Europe 3 days later, go to Asia. That wasn't exhausting, because you always have that base. Then I did the perpetual nomad, where you say, I'm going to travel throughout Southeast Asia, and every month I'm going to be in a new country. I'm going to meet people. I'm going to meet the CEO of a bank. I'm going to meet somebody in, entrepreneurship, whatever. That certainly, I think, does get old, where you're dragging a suitcase behind you. What I developed was the system of having a base. I first found Malaysia as a place to have a base. It's still one of the 6 bases. And so, as I'm going to travel for a conference we're hosting in Mexico City in September, I'm going to pack up all my clothing in one place, go to the other, and then, come back to another home. So it's much less exhausting having that infrastructure where you have places that you can call home. I think that what people should understand is, my lifestyle doesn't have to be your lifestyle. Some people, a lot of our clients, they say, I make $3 million a year. I want to be in one place, and I want the time zone to be good. So if they're working with Americans, they're going to live either in Portugal or in Ireland, or they're going to live in Panama or something like that. And so they just live in that one place. And it's a tax-friendly place, and that's what they do. And that saves them on taxes, and they still get to diversify and everything. Or you can live my trifecta, 4 months in 3 different places. Or you can be a little bit chaotic about it, which I've done, but you always have those homes. And so I think that if you build the infrastructure over time, it's a lot less chaotic.
So we're going to get into what the best places are. You mentioned Portugal, which is an interesting one, actually. But before we do, what would you say some of the disadvantages are to only having one passport?
Well, I think what we've seen in recent years is your country entirely controls what you can do. One of the big things, there's been a few big trends in the last couple of years. One of them is the advent of a wealth tax and related taxes, like unrealized capital gains tax. I'm talking about trends in US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, UK, Western countries, Germany as well. Wealth tax is one of them. Retroactive taxes even, but also, let's cancel your passport. What was Boris Johnson talking about? If we don't like the way that you conducted yourself overseas, we reserve the right to cancel your passport. The US can cancel your passport for tax debts. Other countries talked about that. People from Australia couldn't come back to their own country during the pandemic. In Canada, it's the one country in the world that's tightening entry restrictions. And so you may not be able to leave your country. You may not be able to come back to your country if you're overseas. If you were stuck overseas, everyone thinks like the Vietnam War, the helicopters come and save you if you're an American. Everyone had to pay for themselves. And you can say that's a good fiscal strategy, but the idea that you're getting a benefit for being a citizen of a country is just not there. And so they can do whatever they want. The United States, where I'm from, taxes people no matter where they live, merely because you carry that passport. And so you can dramatically reduce those taxes. It's a little bit harder than a few years ago, but you can get it down to 0 or probably single digits. But you've still got to phone home to the IRS. You've still got to tell them where your bank accounts are. And you're still subject to US regulations. I have people who do business in Southeast Asia, for example, and the way that business is done there doesn't match up with the way the US requires their citizens to conduct themselves. So whether it's taxing you, whether you live there or not, whether it's restricting your freedom of movement, whether it's forcing you to do anything that takes away from your freedom, there's so many things that they can do. And, for me, when I first got the first second passport, there's a different feeling. I think you feel it. And it's like, you know what? Now I have options. And if this country over here decides to screw me, hey, I can go over here. I ultimately gave up US citizenship for a number of reasons. I wasn't really paying much in taxes legally. So the taxes, contrary to the media's narrative, wasn't really the issue. but I just felt like they were making it harder and harder and harder to be an expat. I was a citizen, which should be a benefit. But in many cases, countries and politicians are saying, no, 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 it's an obligation. Canada now, they want citizens. A few politicians are talking about you should pay taxes for the privilege of being Canadian. I thought it was you had the privilege of having us as part of the country, and it was a service to us who are part of this tribe. No, they see it the other way. And so don't you want to have a backup plan or multiple backup plans? In addition to more places you can live without asking permission, you want to have backup plans for whatever your country can do, because I think we've seen it's going to get worse.
Yeah. Do you think that the need for multiple passports and dual citizenship is becoming more necessary as the years go by?
Well,
in what
I mean,
way?
how long ago was it? Like, okay, all right, fine. The U.S. It's a dump, but hey, thankfully you're from Canada, right? I mean, you donate money to some people, and they freeze your bank accounts. By the way, people say, oh, well, Singapore's not perfect. Andrew Bank's in Singapore. Well, that's great. I don't live in Singapore, and I don't really care what happens in Singapore as long as my money is safe and the banks stay in the top 15 safest on earth. I'm not there protesting whatever they're doing in Singapore. And so that's the point of the diversification, right? I mean, when you're banking, for example, in the same country that you are living and you have a political interest, I mean, that's a challenge, right? So why don't you just live in a place to live? I live in Malaysia part of the year, and whatever they want to do, it's not my business. And they treat me well, and I get left alone, and everyone's nice, and the tax man leaves me alone. And so it's not my business how they want to run their country. But, Canada was the place to go. Australia was a place. New Zealand, how many wealthy people? I was saying 5 years ago, New Zealand, there's much better alternatives at a lower price point that are just better. And now everyone's kind of coming to realize that. And so I think that, what I've talked about is legacy brand countries. Countries that have this it's Coca-Cola, right? And why is it why don't you drink RC Cola? Why don't you drink the store brand? Because Coca-Cola has been around. It's the legacy brand they advertise, right? Montenegro doesn't really advertise, right? Malaysia doesn't really advertise. And so you don't think about those places, but yet the countries that are legacy brands are getting away with murder in some cases.
You mentioned how the relationship between the people and the government in terms of, isn't it supposed to be a privilege that I'm part of your country rather than it's a privilege to hold that Canadian passport?
Yeah.
So in what way is that relationship changing between the citizens and the state? And why do you think it's changing? It's moving towards a more negative relationship for us?
Well, I think it's largely happening look at the Five Eyes countries, for example, look at larger countries. I mean, I had, a very controversial guy, the former president of Georgia, Mikhail Saakashvili, who basically put in the Constitution that you have to have a referendum to increase taxes. They slashed taxes from 21 to 5 or 6. They flattened all the rates. They dramatically lowered all the rates, and you cannot raise those taxes. By the way, you can live there and pay 0 or 1% as a foreigner, but you can't raise those taxes without everyone getting together and voting. It's not just the legislature. And he seems to think that his country's a little bit too small because it's hard to govern and make tough choices because you walk around Tbilisi, the capital, and you see the people who you had to lay off and you see their families. But because it was a small country, they could turn around on a dime. They fired the entire police force one day because it was corrupt, and they brought in all new people. You're not going to do that in the U.S. How do you solve the problem in the U.S. or even the U.K. or even Canada? Number one, the culture is people are so addicted to the fact that they're living in a legacy brand country that this is the best. How long does it take to breed that out of people, right? To where they're just going to accept whatever comes down because this is the best. Even people who complain about it on our channel are like, sure, but it's still the best thing out there. Statistically, it's not by any measure, right? You have like the 59th worst crime rate, the 72nd or something like that, corruption. I mean, like it's statistically best, US, Canada, Australia, number one in nothing. But everyone thinks it is. They're going to keep supporting politicians that keep going further and further down, higher taxes, anti-freedom. On the other hand, right, they're just such big countries. How is the US going to turn on a dime? I mean, okay, I'm going to vote for Republicans. George W. Bush took your tax rate from 39 to 35%. Woohoo, right? Trump took it to 37. If you make over 400 grand, 450, whatever it is, you're paying 37 plus. California's raising, everyone's raising, right? And so you could just move somewhere else and pay 0 or pay 1 or pay 5. There's plenty. Italy and Greece, for the love of Pete, have tax incentives where you can make as much money as you want and pay one flat rate. Italy and freaking Greece, right? At least there's a little bit of acknowledgement, and those kind of like, we need to bring in some cash. The US isn't ever going to have that. They'll just print more. The UK, they're not going to change.
So what would you say some of the multiple, what are some of the benefits of having multiple passports?
Well, I think the biggest thing is optionality, right? So there's a number of, let's talk about how you can get one. If you have a parent, grandparent, great-grandparent, you can get citizenship potentially where they're from. So if you've got an Irish grandparent, you can get Irish citizenship. Okay, now you can live in the UK, and they've got a tax incentive for foreigners. You can live in Ireland. The tax incentive may be difficult if you're not a foreigner, but possible. You can live anywhere you want in the European Union. And obviously the European Union is not as free as many places, but there are places that are better for certain things. Bulgaria, for example, was ahead of the game in some things, even parts of like Spain, that kind of thing. So you get to choose if you have that passport. Do you want to live there? Do you not? But that's through descent. You can make an investment. I have a passport in the Caribbean. They don't bother you. It's the exact opposite of the US. They don't want your taxes. They don't want to know anything about you. Okay. Are you a criminal? Do you have a good character? We're going to do a background check. If you're approved, here's your citizenship. My point is like, they're not going to be tracking your banking. They're a peaceful, small country. No one hates the St. Lucians. No one hates the Antiguans, right? No one's going to get into a tiff with the Antiguans and say you can't get a visa to come to our country. So I think it allows you to continue to do business, to bank, to diversify your assets, have another place to live when times get tough, have another passport to travel on, open up new places to travel to, have a different, identity. Not that you should lie about which citizenships you have or claim that you're not an American when you are in an official proceeding, whatever. But it just gives you the option to pivot. And if one day your country does something where they want to take more of your money, let's say Elizabeth Warren gets her way, or let's say I just did a video the other day about there's some group that wants to roll out a simple flat tax, wealth tax on oligarchs in the US, 8% a year. Imagine if they come after and say, every year you have to give us 8% of your net worth. You can say, you know what? Here's your passport back. I'm going over here. And who knows how much more difficult it will be in the future as the US has tried to force legislation to push places like Europe to stop letting these Caribbean citizens come. So, I mean, they don't like competition. The big governments are angry, and that's what this whole global minimum tax that you're reading about is about. How dare you have a tax rate of 9%? If you're a small country, you want to encourage business to come and hire your people and do what's right for your citizens. But the big established countries, the mafias, as it were, they don't want competition. They want to snuff that out. They want to make sure you have to keep paying 37%. And so having a passport is, in the most extreme of ways, the backup plan that you can say, I'm out.
How many passports can you hold at once? I believe different countries have different rules.
Yeah. So most countries, I mean, there is a trend towards dual citizenship. We've seen countries like Norway. More recently, we've seen like Liberia in Africa, which, there are people who can claim African citizenship by descent. But more countries are opening up. Germany now, the government, they want to tax. But the one good thing they're talking about is allowing Germans more freedom in dual citizenship. So that's the trend. If you have the ability to hold dual citizenship, generally speaking, let's say you're American, you're British, you're Australian, it basically means when you're in that country, when you're in the US, you should be an American. You have to enter on your US passport, leave on your US passport. And so if you get arrested, for example, hopefully no one's getting arrested, but if you get arrested in the United States, you can't say, hey, I'm also a Dominican. Let me call the Dominica embassy and let me help. No, you're an American. You're here, you're an American. But what they say is, we don't really care what you do outside of the country. And so you could hold, one guy was reputed to have 8. I hold 5 and I was going for a 6th. So there's really no limit in most cases, as long as none of the countries has a limit. So you'll see some countries where they restrict dual citizenship. You'll see others like Russia where there's a reporting requirement. And I saw someone got in trouble recently for not reporting it fast enough. But if you're allowed to have dual citizenship, that could be triple, quadruple, multiple.
What's the quickest and easiest way to get your second passport?
Well, it depends. I think citizenship by descent through ancestry, depending, like if you've got a parent who was born in Canada, for example, a lot of people don't know this. If you're born in Canada, born in Mexico, born in most countries in the Americas, you are a citizen by birth. When I give up U.S. citizenship, it doesn't say because your parents are American. It says you obtain citizenship by birth in the United States. And so people don't realize if their parent was Canadian or Mexican or Argentine, born there, they can apply for that passport. And so Canada, I think, is relatively fast, but citizenship by descent is definitely slowed down. It might take a couple of years. If you just want the fastest path, you would look at something like citizenship by investment. So you've got 5 Caribbean countries. You've got Montenegro, where I've got a home. I think it's a very overpriced program. You've got Turkey, which recently increased, but that's really the only program where an investment makes sense. You get to buy real estate, not just real estate on a list, as is the case in the Caribbean, but you get to buy real estate anywhere in Turkey. And so if you buy correctly, most people don't. If you buy correctly, you can sell that in 3 years and probably come out about even. So for our purposes, I would suggest there are 5 Caribbean countries where the general option is you make a donation from $100,000 on up, or you go to Turkey, which has a different kind of passport. Obviously, it's a big country. They have their own beefs with people, but it's an investment. And so which one do you want? If you're in Bitcoin, you probably want to keep as much money in Bitcoin as possible. You'd rather spend $100,000 in St. Lucia, Dominica, what have you, than invest 400, 4.25, and wait a couple of years. So those are probably the 6 fastest options. When you figure out all the paperwork you've got to collect and apostille and everything else, you're probably looking at 6 to 7, 8 months.
You said that you have 5 passports. Can you tell us which countries those are?
I don't talk about it, and I don't think people should talk about it. And I've talked about some of them. I've talked about St. Lucia, for example, the Caribbean, and I was very happy to see that Americans are 900% up in terms of applications in St. Lucia, and maybe one day they'll give me a flag pin or something. But I don't talk about them. I don't think you should. I think that you want to. You want to be diversified. You want to have options. I specifically, so I helped my wife get Armenian citizenship through descent. And she thought it was silly at the time. And I think a lot of people who have good passports think it's silly to get such a low quality, quote unquote, passport. And yet what she found was it was so much easier to get residence permits around the world because she can get an Armenian police report in one day. She can get anything done in one day. The embassies are actually helpful, unlike where she's from and unlike where I'm from, where everything takes a lot longer. So it's a much better identity. And especially right now where she's from is from Moscow, and it's not really the best way to represent yourself in many places. So that was a good diversification for her. You can talk about that because that's your identity. But I certainly wouldn't want someone who is Armenian to go out and do the Turkish citizenship by investment. And by the way, if Turkey knew, they wouldn't offer it to you. And if Armenia knew that you were Turkish, they wouldn't let you naturalize probably. So I wouldn't suggest doing something like that. But certainly you never know when a conflict could break out. And I wouldn't necessarily want to be on the record. Not that I believe in doing things. I believe in being very much on the up and up, but I certainly wouldn't want to put things out there needlessly.
Yeah, no, I understand. That makes a lot of sense.
I think no one should.
No, yeah, I agree with you. You said low quality passports. So I want to get more information on that. What countries would you regard as low quality? And then which countries would you say are good passports to hold?
I think what I'm using is the kind of the speech that you hear people saying, like they look at the travel privileges of an Armenian, and it's not a lot. You can come to Asia. You can travel within kind of Central Asia. You can go to Georgia, whatever, but like you're not going to Europe without a visa. There's a lot of places you can't go. And so what I've categorized it as, there's 3 tiers of citizenship. There's tier A, which is American, British, Australian, where you can pretty much go everywhere. The United States and Australia probably being 2 of the hardest. A minus is like Romania, where you're pretty much going everywhere as an EU citizen, but you need a visa for the US. Then you've got tier B, which is most of what I have, which is you can go to Europe, right? You can go to the Schengen area in Europe. B plus would be you could also go to the UK and Ireland, which all the Caribbean passports have, right? And then tier C would be you can go to neither the US or Europe, and that would be where Armenia falls. That would be technically where Turkey falls. Turkey's pretty strong because it's a big country, and there's lots of countries around the world that would love to have their 80 million people coming. So Turkey or Russia are pretty strong outside of the West because all the other countries want them. Armenia, obviously, or a country like that, doesn't really have a lot of negotiating power to open up all those countries to travel to. And so they're not particularly wealthy. They're not particularly big. And so, the passport isn't as good for travel. But here's the thing. If you're British, if you're American, why wouldn't you claim that? Especially if you have Armenian descent, it makes sense. And then you can use it to go to the countries that they can go to. You can get a residence permit using that passport potentially more easily than you could as an American or British person in some cases. It's nice diversification. And you have one big country, one small country. So I think it depends on the mix. Like I got St. Lucia. If you came to me and said, I want a passport in the Caribbean, that would probably be my last suggestion. But for me, it meshed well with the other passports I had. I already had the visa-free travel gaps that St. Lucia has covered somewhere else. And I thought that, okay, for me, I want something that's a bit newer, doesn't really have much of a reputation, like doesn't have a bad reputation, hasn't been exposed in some story. And I thought, that's why St. Lucia. But if I were recommending it to someone else, that would probably be last on my list if you were getting one passport. So you have to take things, collectively, right? If you're Egyptian of Armenian descent, okay, take it. But that's not really solving your problems as much as if you're British and you can add Armenian. Now you can go to Russia, you can go to China, you can go to Iran. You've got big country, small country. So that's what I mean. It's diversification.
It depends what you have, I understand. And so in terms of, you did talk about this earlier, but the passport itself, whose property is that? So I know some people, without naming names or making things too obvious, who during the lockdowns were taken from the airport and had to go into quarantine camps, and their passports were taken. So they literally had to go. So who owns your passport? Whose property is it?
Well, I think when you're in the international airport and you're going through the border, they can stop you. I won't name any names or countries either, but there's certain places in the Americas where, they'll put you in both the U.S. but also some of the Latin countries where they're just like, oh, sit over here for a while. And they take your passport and they're supposed to let you call the embassy, and they don't have to. So it's important to go to places where you are welcomed and where they're just cool. But in terms of who owns your passport itself, yeah, the government owns your passport. They don't have to issue you one. Again, in the United States, and I encourage everyone to comply with the tax laws, but I got into a scuffle with California many, many, many years ago when I was much less successful, over $1,000. Imagine if you were 50 times as successful and it was $50,000. Well, now you can be on the IRS radar and they can cancel your passport or refuse to issue you one by communicating with the State Department. And so other countries are doing that in different ways for different reasons. And so they absolutely own it. They don't have to let you travel. Now, you are supposed to leave the U.S. on a U.S. passport. There's no exit controls of the U.S. So some people kind of have a hard time understanding how that works. But let's say you were a resident of Mexico. Could you go to Mexico and walk over and then have another passport to travel? Obviously, I encourage people to play by the rules. But if you can't get a passport, listen, pay your taxes. And if you don't want to pay them, then go where you're treated best. But I think that the fact that they can stop you from traveling.
Yeah, I think that just blows my mind. And in terms of, what you do, you help people obviously obtain different passports and things like that. I'm interested to know, has your content online, your clientele, just everything increased during the last 2 years after people saw what has happened?
I forget the percentages, but it's been very, very substantial. Yeah.
That's crazy.
So this year we're kind of taking the time. We're still up, but it's not up like 400% anymore, partially because from a business point of view, we want to kind of reposition and make sure that we have the right people in place to drive that, because it's been extremely overwhelming for the last 2 years. It's been nonstop. And I'm glad that there's a little bit of peace right now, but no, it's been crazy. And what's been interesting to me is I've been saying this stuff for a decade. And for the first time, you see people from countries like Australia who are like, why do I need a passport? Oh, you mean your country that violated international law and wouldn't let you into the country or out of the country? Like the UN, probably not our favorite organization. What is it they said decades ago? Everyone should be able to enter their country and leave their country. That's like citizenship 101. Like you can come and you can go. And they violated that. And so everyone who was like, oh, you're going to live in Malaysia. Yeah, okay, well, I left Malaysia. Nobody stopped me from leaving Malaysia. Now, there were a few countries where if you were a citizen of the country, they restricted citizens. Well, that's the kind of country you wouldn't be a citizen of. You'd be a resident. And it's the country where citizenship would be difficult. So we're finally seeing all these Western countries, not just for tax reasons, but now for personal freedom reasons, seeing that the bloom is off the rose and their place is It's just an expensive version of everything else. It's like, I need some shoes. I'm going to Prada. Listen, if you like Prada shoes, buy them and pay 20 times the price. But you are paying 20 times the price for not that much better shoes. I happen to like the shoes, so I buy them. But like, I get it. Like, you could buy leather shoes somewhere else. And so people are realizing I'm paying all this money, right? What was it in Germany recently? Landlords are turning off air conditioning because this government you pay half your money in taxes to couldn't figure out that the West has been at odds with a country that provides a lot of their energy for how long now? And they never had a backup plan, so that in the middle of the summer, landlords are conserving by turning off people's electricity. And you've been paying them all these years to figure it out for you. Hey, just relax and we'll take care of it. You paid the bill and they don't deliver the service.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. And I think it was Trump actually who predicted that that was going to happen, and everybody sort of laughed at him for saying that. But the last few years have been so enlightening and fascinating for a lot of people. I know people often say they were red pilled over the last 2 years, realizing the extent to which the government will go. So which countries would you say have become more free? Has anything sort of changed your mind, and which countries are more favorable than others?
Well, there's two areas that we focus on. So our area is on holistic planning. So it's finances, freedom, and lifestyle. And I think that, especially coming from a US background, you have to match it up. It's not just a matter of leaving the US and hoping it all works. You've got to figure out your residence, your citizenship, your tax plan, your personal, your corporate, everything at once. So there's the tax part. And I like the fact that countries like Malaysia and Uruguay came out and said, we're not going to raise taxes. I like the fact that you're seeing, again, some of these countries in Europe that are doubling down on their tax incentives, including the Italys, the Greece, the Irelands, et cetera. For personal freedom, we've seen Latin America. Obviously, Mexico has been a standout. They were wide open through all of it. Now they are becoming. It's not just you can't live in Mexico as a tourist anymore. Good thing is residence is pretty affordable to get. You don't really need to invest. You just need to have money. But the days of the 180-day tourist visa, no questions asked, leave, come back a day later, that's over by all means in Mexico. But Mexico is free. Panama was difficult at first. I think I was in Colombia for a good chunk of 2021, and I would say that was pretty good. The people are a bit more conservative, but that was pretty good from a government standpoint. And what I would encourage people to think also is when you see some of the laws, let me give you an example. I was in Istanbul at the end of 2020, and when I got there, they said, we're having a weekend lockdown. We poke our heads out on Saturday. Everyone's walking around. They're selling hot dogs and hamburgers on the streets. Kids are playing in the squares, and the police are watching. If that's a lockdown, right? Tell me that's the same lockdown as what they had in New Zealand or Australia or Canada. It's not the same. And so people say, lockdown. It's no better there. Believe me, all right? It's a lot better. And so Latin America was one place, even though they had some things, nobody enforced it. And then Eastern Europe was pretty open. I was in Serbia for the fourth quarter of 2020. They closed some restaurants, but I think generally that was pretty good. And so those have been the two parts of the world from a personal standpoint that have been good. If you think that the pandemic is over, then Asia is not ready for you. But certainly I think for personal freedom in general, Asia leaves you alone for the most part. But Eastern Europe, Latin America have been good. And then for low taxes, you're seeing more small countries double down on tax incentives.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What about, you mentioned the Prada shoes, which I thought was really funny.
Yeah.
And do you think we'll get to a point where these countries like the US, Canada, the UK will have to start to offer better incentives because people are leaving, because we're moving into this digital era whereby, I don't need to be based in the UK. I don't need to be based in the US in order to make good money. I can be based anywhere. So do you think, I don't know, even in like 10, 15 years, they might change their tunes slightly in order to be more competitive?
It'll be interesting to see. Again, I'm a big believer in smaller countries are best. I think the biggest legacy brands like the US, the Coca-Colas, the Pradas, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Sure, change happens at the margins, but I think that, most people are still going to want to go to the US. And by the way, the argument from a lot of Americans is, look at everyone coming here. Yes, by the way, I feel very badly, and I think the US is largely to blame. Yes, all the Salvadorian economic migrants who are coming to the country because they're not safe where they live and because they don't have any money. that's not really a barometer. Like, we want billionaires coming. We want people building factories coming. And I'm not saying we don't want them coming also, but the fact that they're coming doesn't mean that you shouldn't leave. If you're making $1 million a year, or if you've got a $10 million portfolio, your needs are a little bit different. My fear is that, yes, you will see marginal changes in places like the US. I think you're going to see a big change in the US in the next 15 years because all these people are moving to Florida and Texas, in addition to immigration. Yeah. And it's going to be becoming impossible for anybody who wants to keep taxes low to win. But, to me, it's about culture. And, as they say about alcoholism, you got to hit rock bottom sometimes, right? If you have a family member or a friend who's an alcoholic and they lost their job and they want to sleep on your couch, at a certain point, you got to let them sleep on the street, because maybe that's the only thing that's going to empower them to fix their situation. And I kind of think that you're going to have to see that. And I'm not one of these doom and gloom people who thinks that the dollar and the US are tanking to oblivion tomorrow. I think that they've got a lot of force and they're going to push the agenda, just as you're seeing with this global minimum tax. They want to stop competition. They want to make it difficult. They want to make it harder to get a second passport. They want to make other countries raise their tax rates. That's not the US deal. I mean, look at Andorra, for example. Spain and France bullied them for years and they started taxing people. So I think that it's going to take a long time, whether it's 10, 15 years or 100 years, I don't know. But, I'd rather be prepared early. I think the biggest countries are going to fight.
I see that. It's going to be really interesting. We have touched on tax havens, but I would like to get a bit more detail on that. Which would you say are the best tax havens right now? And how easy is it to move there?
Well, best is always relative, like, because you've got all kinds of different people. So I think one country that doesn't get enough attention, I think the people there are fantastic. And if you only speak English, it's a great soft landing, is Ireland. And you can get Irish citizenship by descent. You can get Malta citizenship in about 18 months for $1 million. Or less. You can, if you're a British citizen, you can just move there, or you can get a residence permit. And they've got a great tax incentive for foreigners that's not talked about enough, where basically you pay for your cost of living. And then any other money you have on top of that you could just stay overseas. However, it's not really friendly for cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, what have you. It's believed, and it's never been really formalized, that they follow kind of the UK's similar law, where it's not as crypto friendly. So if you're an entrepreneur and you only speak English, and like I was just in Ireland a little while ago, I have the most soulful conversations there just with everyday people that I wouldn't have in Asia, for example, where it's just more basic. They speak English, but it's more basic. And so if you want that, that's great. But if you're into Bitcoin, that's not going to be as great. Portugal is kept flirting with, we don't want the Bitcoin wealth. So a country like in Italy could be good. I mean, Dubai is always good. The Cayman Islands are good. A couple of the citizenship by investment countries are good. Antigua, St. Kitts. Even if you're a citizen of another Eastern Caribbean country, you could live in those countries. Southeast Asian countries like Malaysia and Thailand can be good with a few restrictions and a few caveats. So, I mean, there's plenty of places to go. Some countries are more Bitcoin friendly. Others, cut that out of their tax exemption, like the Ireland. So, I mean, there's so many places that are coming up, and it depends on what you want to pay. I mean, you can go to Uruguay, and for 10 years, you can basically pay nothing. You could also live the Trifecta lifestyle, which for me was, I want to spend a little bit of time in a few different places. I'm loving each place that I go, but after a while I get bored. And so if you live in Colombia, for example, have a home in Colombia, you can get permanent residence by buying a property. You can work towards citizenship without really having to be there if you speak Spanish. Mm-hmm. And their taxation is a day's test. If you're under 183 in a year, that's it. You can't do that in most countries in Europe because they're going to start saying, but you got a car. Yeah, it's close enough. Colombia, if you live there for 4 months a year, it's hardly a tax haven, but it can be a tax haven for you. So there's so many different ways you can do it.
And just finally, I'd love to get your take on Bitcoin and crypto, but specifically Bitcoin, just because I do regard it as this form of money which facilitates the lifestyle which you're obviously promoting. So what's your take? Do you like Bitcoin?
I do. We hold, Bitcoin. I'm a hodler. I'm not someone who's all in on anything. That's my personality. I'm a very security-minded person, and I think that, having varying assets is important. Especially because, holding assets in some countries entitles you to residence permits, citizenships, et cetera. And I think that more people in Bitcoin should look at that as we publish on Twitter, for example, today's price of, St. Lucia citizenship is, 5 Bitcoin. And it's always like, it'll be 2 soon. Right. And maybe your country will tax you to oblivion or institute a wealth tax or, find some new way to screw you before it gets there. So, better years too early than a day too late. Take some percentage and buy an insurance policy. If you, buy a $500,000 car, you're not going to spend $300,000 to insure it, but you would spend $3,000 to insure it, or even $10,000 to insure it, to make sure you don't get sued when you hit somebody. So I think figure out what you can spend on insurance and do that. And I think that at times, that's been my frustration, but we've worked with a lot of people in Bitcoin. I hold a position. I believe in it, but I certainly think that, diversification and everything is important.
Understood. But yeah, I think especially when it comes to that trifecta lifestyle you're talking about, it's, for me personally, it's a great way to keep moving. You can't exactly bring your gold with you as you travel around the world.
And for example, Colombia. I mean, like, you can't make every country work for everything. So we've talked about Mexico, we've talked about Colombia. Oh, should I get a bank account in Mexico? No, you shouldn't. I'm not saying there aren't some strong banks there, but I'm saying that you don't have any bank secrecy, not from the government, but from like people, like criminals even. And so you don't want to do that. So bank somewhere else. And so, if you want to bring money into Colombia, it's going to be a lot easier to use Bitcoin than like having to carry your cash or your gold. Because I can tell you, some of those countries in Latin America, I mean, it's still like, are you Pablo Escobar? Like $100,000, which is why if I had to choose one part of the world to skip, I love Mexico City, I love Bogota, but I would skip Latin America because I think there's just a lot of bureaucracy in that part of the world. But people are fighters there. And I think that, as a result, you can have some decent level of freedom. So I think in that regard, Bitcoin works very well.
Yeah, this is also fascinating. Where can people follow you and keep up to date with all the information and value you provide?
So we've got free resources, nomadcapitalist.com. We have over 1,200 blog articles we've written over the years and keep up to date. YouTube, Nomad Capitalist. We've got over 1,800 videos. We put out a new one every day. You can get our book on Amazon, Nomad Capitalist. We recently updated it. And so that's like 10 or 11 bucks. And you get kind of a nice succinct idea of stories, what you can do, what you can't do, just to kind of whet your beak, as it were. And you can also go to nomadcapitalist.com. We work with people. We not only have Nomad Capitalist Live, if you just want to kind of come and absorb all of this in a higher level setting and meet people and learn from the playbook. That's coming up this year. And then we also work with several hundred clients every year who are high-level investors and entrepreneurs who just want someone to put all the pieces together, who has the experience in all these different countries, who has the network of lawyers and accountants in every country, and make sure that what you do in Portugal doesn't screw up what you're trying to accomplish in the US, because I see that far too often. So from free to $10 to $5,000 to multi 5 figures.
So basically, whatever you need, there's a product, a service for you that fits within your bracket. Andrew, I want to thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure having you on, and it's so important to have these conversations. I feel like I need to go get another passport now after this, so I'm going to go deal with that. But thank you so much for coming on, Andrew.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. And guys, thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the like button so you never miss a video. And we will see you all next week. Bye-bye. The Layah Heilpern Show.